This episode's quote comes from Aldous Huxley in a speech which he gave at Berkeley in 1962 called The Ultimate Revolution.
And we're fortunate enough to have this in multimedia form, so we're going to play a little video closing out the show here with the actual audio of Mr. Huxley himself saying it best. And until next time, please keep unstacking the deck.
In the past, we can say that all revolutions have essentially aimed at changing the environment in order to change the individual, so that by modifying the surroundings you did achieve at one remove an effect upon the human being. Today we are faced, I think, with the approach of what may be called the ultimate revolution, the final revolution, where man can act directly on the mind-body of his fellows. Well, needless to say, some kind of direct action on human mind-bodies has been going on since the beginning of time. But this has generally been of a violent nature. The techniques of terrorism have been known from time immemorial, and people have employed them with more or less ingenuity, sometimes with the utmost crudity, sometimes with a good deal of skill acquired by a process of trial and error, finding out what the best ways of using torture, imprisonment, constraints of various kinds. If you are going to control any population for any length of time, you must have some measure of consent. It's exceedingly difficult to see how pure terrorism can function indefinitely. It can function for a fairly long time, but I think sooner or later you have to bring in an element of persuasion, an element of getting people to consent to what is happening to them. We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy, who have always existed and presumably always will exist, to get people actually to love their servitude. This is seems to me the ultimate in malevolent revolution, shall we say. And this is a problem which has interested me for many years, and about which I wrote 30 years ago a fable, The Brave New World, which is essentially the account of a society making use of all the devices at that time available, and some of the devices which I imagined to be possible, making use of them in order to, first of all, to standardize the population, to iron out inconvenient human differences, to create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system. And I have noticed with increasing dismay that a number of the predictions which were purely fantastic when I made them have come true or seem in process of coming true, that a number of techniques about which I talked seem to be here already. This method of control by which people can be made to enjoy a state of affairs which, by any decent standard, they ought not to enjoy. I mean, the enjoyment of servitude. In George Orwell's book, 1984, was a projection into the future of a society where control was exercised wholly by terrorism and violent attacks upon the mind-body of individuals. The scientific dictatorships of the future, and I think there are going to be scientific dictatorships in many parts of the world, will be probably a good deal nearer to the Brave New World pattern than to the 1984 pattern. They will be a good deal nearer, not because of any humanitarian qualms in the scientific dictators, but simply because the Brave New World pattern is probably a good deal more efficient than the other. you are likely to have a much more stable and much more lasting society, a much more easily controllable society than you would if you were relying wholly on clubs and firing squads and concentration camps. As dictators become more and more scientific, more and more concerned with a technically perfectly running society, already a number of the techniques for bringing about this kind of control are here, and it remains to be seen when and where and by whom they will first be applied in any large scale. Terrorism, I think there have been improvements. Conditioning techniques applied to animals or humans in a state either of psychological or physical stress sank in, so to say, very deeply into the mind-body of the creature, and were extremely difficult to get rid of, that they seem to be embedded more deeply than other forms of conditioning. We can extend what we are doing over a wider area with a greater assurance of producing something which really works, based upon a technique of heightening psychological stress to the limit by talking about hellfire, and so making people extremely vulnerable to suggestion, and then suddenly releasing this stress by offering hopes of heaven. We now know the reason why these techniques worked, and there's no doubt at all that we can, if we want to, carry them much further than was possible in the past. And of course, in the recent history of brainwashing, we see that the Pavlovian methods have been applied systematically and evidently with extraordinary efficacy. I mean, I think there can be no doubt that by the application of these methods, a very large army of totally devoted people has been created. The conditioning has been driven in, so to say, into the very depth of the people's being, and has got so deep that it's very difficult for it ever to be rooted out. And these methods, I think, are a real refinement on the older methods of terror, because they combine methods of terror with methods of acceptance.